Undeniably, film images and video have a powerful and influential role in today's society. From recording our lives on the spot to learning, the proliferation of visual media plays a massive role in culture, education, and knowledge acquisition. But what are its roots? The motion picture camera was invented in the 1890s, and the first movies lasted less than 1 minute. The cameras were mounted on a tripod and fixed during the course of a shot. Subjects would move in and out of the screen, however, the camera had no ability to follow them. The first camera movements were recorded by mounting a camera to a moving vehicle. In 1897, Robert W. Paul built the first rotating camera to commemorate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. A crank handle was used to move the camera that was mounted on a vertical axis. The late 1890s to early 1900s saw many firsts, which included the building of the first film studio, the first stop-motion animation film, the building of a permanent movie theater in Pittsburgh, and the first feature-length multi-reel film that came out of Australia. One may wonder why films gained such popularity in the first 11 years since its development. But the world was calling for something more, and the culture demanded the next step in the evolution of technology. In the early 1900s, cinema had moved from being a traveling show to a permanent theater. Early films were silent, so the elements of theater were retained in order to entertain audiences for longer periods of time. Live orchestras accompanied the silent movies, and sometimes narrators or speakers bridged the missing narrative that had been seen in traditional theater. In 1929, Hollywood was almost all talkie, and luckily so, as the Great Depression hit. A devastating blow upon the United States caused movies to become the balm that soothed the masses. The escape offered on screen and the speed at which they were churned out kept audiences enthralled. The 1920s was, and still is, the United States' greatest era of output. By the time World War II hit, the desire for wartime propaganda created a renaissance in the film industry. A proliferation of patriotic movies hit the screens as men lined up to enlist and become off-screen heroes. Film had begun to wield its powerful influence over culture. Newsreels, mostly propaganda, were shown before feature films as a way of synchronizing cultural thoughts and homogeneity. Patriotism was at an all-time high, as film influenced cultural identity. In this manner, film technology made art imitate life on big screen, as films opened windows into culture and subsequently history. The changes in ways of thinking and knowing extended further into the realm of educational practices. As film techniques became more sophisticated, it invited the audiences to participate through analytical thought. Early directors like Alfred Hitchcock used reflexive techniques to make the audiences analyze things, such as camera angles. Film demanded an interpretation that went beyond the text on pages and entreated the audiences to actively participate in the experience through their own comprehension of events. The tradition of rote learning and textual authenticity was called into question. The relevant and engaging medium of imparting knowledge could not be ignored by educators anymore. However, its initial uses were one-dimensional and uninspired until the 21st century. Now that film technology had entered the realm of education, it needed to be thoroughly understood in order to grasp the ways in which it extended and modified the look and feel of reading and writing as we knew it. Film technology moved the text from the author's control to the director's control. A variety of strategies, such as images, sounds, and camera angles, engaged the viewer in both verbal and nonverbal interpretation of events. Decoding and comprehension skills gained new depth as film required the viewer to read between the lines. The skills required to read the message were almost as important as the message itself. Student literacy skills were extended as they were required to interpret image content and oral content simultaneously. Evaluation, analysis, and synthesis skills based on the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy became a necessary part of literacy. Students were no longer just asked to analyze the content as they had in books, but film technology required analysis of also the medium of production. Film encouraged involvement in content in ways that surpassed written text. It extended the narrative structure by going beyond the traditional literary devices. Students now had to understand the paratextual element as well. Soon, viewers came to recognize directors' names such as Hitchcock, and more recently Scorsese, in the ways that Dickens and Bronte were once recognized as pioneers in the literary world. By developing and extending literacy, film technology also invited new forms of knowledge and thought. The tools of media literacy had become one of the most important elements in knowledge acquisition for high school students. Film revealed that truth was no longer relevant as it was once thought to have been in textbooks. Film brought to light that the written word was just as unreliable as a moving image. Until this time, more than 200 years of print-based culture had come to rely upon printed word as gospel, but film revealed its unreliability by transposing it into images. In this way, film confronted epistemology and simply reminded us all that text is also a recounted story. Film uncovered the social, political, and environmental contexts, to name a few, and literally created a wide-angle lens from which we could view the whole picture. Students now had to consider the subtext, the text, and the context. Analysis of both content and form were required for in-depth understanding of a technology that articulated the human experience in a manufactured environment. The inductive nature of film moved away from the deductive nature of written text and opened new doors to innovative thinking and practices. As a result of new forms of knowing and thinking, film brought about social and literary changes in modern society. One example is the modern-day music video, which comes from a long history that casts back to the days of silent movies. In 1894, illustrated songs were introduced. These live performances, accompanied by hand-colored glass slides, projected through a stereopticon, were the first mass consumption song videos that would later become the ever-popular music videos of today. The song narrative was illustrated on the glass slides and used as a way of enticing music lovers to purchase the music they heard. The first animation in 1899 led to a huge cartoon and anime industry of today. The initial stop-motion animation was picked up by Walt Disney, who perfected the technique. The anime industry of today has taken on a life of its own in places like Japan and South Korea, where its influence is seen in fashion, identity, and even beauty. Film has also influenced literary changes in the classroom, and in many cases are used alongside a textbook as a primary source of information. Films are themselves historical documents that record evidence of times and cultural practices. Film has taken history beyond the dusty covers of a text and debunked the idea of the constancy of history as even-handed and virtuous. Film has invited theorists to look at textbooks critically in terms of the structure of historical narrative and modes of expression. Film first began almost 150 years ago, and since then, there have been so many changes in technology that have driven it further down a path of enlightenment. Overall, it can be argued that early film was the root of new media as we know it today.